Okay, so today's daf yomi is Bava Kamma daf Yud Beis, Bava Kamma 12. Today's daf yomi, Chodesh Tov, Boker Tov, is dedicated to all those who are serving Am Yisrael. Today's daf yomi tells us we're having a discussion whether or not avadim, which is generally translated as slaves, is going to be considered like karka, like real estate. So the Gemara says. On Yud Beis Amud Aleph around 15 lines on top. Let's say this is Machokas Tanayim because we say Machar lo avadim ukarkos. We have a brisa that says if you sell him slaves or real estate, and hilchzik ba'avadim, if you try to acquire the slaves, lo kana karkos. Yeah, by making an act to acquire the slaves, it doesn't help you to acquire the real estate. Meaning, say that it doesn't work that you can acquire the slaves and at the same time acquire the real estate. But karkos will come out of them. If you do the real estate, it doesn't help you acquire the slaves. Karkos metalton. Let's say you have slaves and movable objects. Hichslik bekarka. If you acquire the real estate, kana metalton. Then at the same time, you're able by dint of acquiring the real estate, you could acquire the metalton. The metalton, but if you try to acquire the real estate, well, kana karka. You have not acquired the if the movables, you have not acquired the real estate. Avadim metaltlin. But now let's see what are the properties of slaves. If you do slaves and movables, avadim. If you've done a proprietary act on the slaves, lo kana metaltlin. You not acquired the movables. But metaltlin, if you do an act on the movables, lo kana avadim. So we see from here that if you do the slaves, that doesn't help you to acquire the movables. So slaves are not like real estate according to that price. But we have a different price about Tanya Hilchzik Ba'avadim. And if you do a proprietary act on the slaves, Kana and you have acquired the movables. So therefore, my love what's the dispute? Tamar Savar Avadim It must be that the first price says slaves are like real estate, and Mar Savar in the second price says Avadim that the first one that says that slaves are the first one says slaves are like real estate, therefore you can acquire movables by acquiring the slaves, and the second price it says that the slaves are like movables, and so therefore you can't acquire the movables by acquiring the slaves. So Amaravika Bereder of Ami, no, everybody says slaves are like real estate. The Tanya Kana Shopper, the one who says that if you acquire the slaves, you can acquire the real estate, that makes sense. The Tanya Lokana, but the one who says you have not acquired it, but Karka Dumya da Aram Mitsuros Bihuda. No, the only way that the real estate acquires the metaltalin, it has to be specific type of real estate that's similar to what Yehoshaphat gave to his sons, as we learned in Mesachas Kedushin and Daf Chav Dalet, because it says it needs to be fortified cities in Judah, Dulon 90, that they don't move. The Tanan, because we learned that movables are acquired with real estate because of shtar v'chazaka. When you acquire the real estate with money, with a shtar, with a contract, a proprietary act. And what's our source for this? The Amar Krach, because the pasuk tells us with respect to Yoshaphat, aviem, as it says in Divrei Yamim Beis, that their father gave them matanos rabos, a lot of gifts, lekesef zahav migdanos, a lot of gifts for money and delights. Im ari mitzuros bihuda, with the fortified cities of Judah. And so we see from here that he gave the money with the 45 cities. Ikeda Amri, some want to say, Amar Vika Breda Rav Idi, the Kuliyama, a different version of this story, a different version of this discussion is everybody says Avdi Kimentalto, that slaves are like movables, and therefore they're not like Karaka, they're not like real estate. Everybody says that Avdim Kimentalto and Dami. Hadatanya Lo Kana, but the approach it says that they have not acquired Shapir, that makes sense. But Hadatanya Kana, the one that says that they do acquire, it's Ba'odanolav. It is only in a circumstance where the movables are still on the slave itself. Gemara says, but even if the movables are still on the real estate, why would it work? It's a movable courtyard. And we have a concept, if it's a movable courtyard, it doesn't work. But if you want to say, no, we're talking about a case where the slave was standing, that shouldn't matter. Anytime we know where if the movable moves, it doesn't acquire, also if it's standing, it wouldn't work. So the Gemara says, yeah, but this case is different. We're talking about a case where the slave himself was tied up. So therefore, if he's tied up and it's on him, then we're going to say it's able to acquire. The Gemara says, but we have a different contradiction between the sources. So it says we say in the first part of the brisa that if you take a hold of the karka, you've acquired the slaves. So therefore, we see from here that and earlier it says that you have not acquired it. So we have another contradiction between the brises. How do we deal with this fact? So the Gemara says, "Hasam ba'omdim besocha." Now, when do we say that if you take a hold of the real estate, you acquire the slaves? That's where the slaves are standing on the karka itself. That's when the karka can acquire the slaves. The Gemara says, "Hani this is only good according to the second lashon, which says that slaves are like movables. That's why it makes sense if the slaves are standing in the middle of the land, they could be acquired because they're like movables, but if not, they can't. But if according to the expression that says that slaves are like real estate, why do we have to be standing inside it? Didn't Shmuel say that even if you sell them 10 pieces of land in 10 countries, that once you acquire one of them, you acquire the other. Meaning to say, you don't need to be standing inside of it. It's kind of cool. Kind of cool. And so the Gemara says, according to your logic, according to the logic, it says that slaves are like movables. Why do we need to be standing inside of it? Didn't we say that slaves don't need that the movables? They don't need to be standing inside of it, but so we don't need to be piled up and literally on the ground. So of it. So therefore, the Gemara says, there's a distinction between the type of movables that the slaves are movables that are 90 that they move, and so therefore require them to be omdim besoho, standing piled up on it. So so too, we're going to say over here, in our circumstance, there's a distinction between movables, between real estate that's moving that needs to be standing on top of it, from real estate that's not moving, where it doesn't need to be standing on it. So the Gemara says, so therefore we're going to say, so there's a distinction. So the Gemara says, so slaves are considered like real estate that moves, and so therefore, if it's not standing on that karka, we're not going to acquire it. But in the case of the land, sadana da'arachadu, it's one land, and they're all connected, and so therefore, we're going to say under those circumstances, you could acquire one land, you could acquire the other. Now we had said in our Mishnah that if there's property that is not that me'ilah doesn't apply to it, the misappropriation of temple property, we're going to say under those circumstances, the laws of nezek apply. The nezek doesn't apply to me'ilah, which is something that could be fall under the misappropriation of temple property. So, it only applies if there is no me'ilah to it. So the Gemara says, okay, maybe we can make a distinction within sacred property that not all sacred property falls under the rubric of me'ilah. Me'ilah who delays bill. If there's no me'ilah, then you could apply nezek. But let's say hamikadesh kachi. But if there is something that is hektish, but there's no me'ilah, then we're going to say that indeed the laws of nezek apply. Montana, who's the author of our Mishnah? So I'm Rabbi Yochanan b'kachim kalim. So it's Rabbi Yochanan about kachim kalim. Rabbi Yochanan says that there's lesser sanctified forms of sacrifices that even though me'ilah doesn't apply to them, they are considered to be hektish. They're like a shlamim, like a type of carbon where the owner gets to eat in it. And so therefore, Rabbi Yochanan says, "Kachim kalim aliba de Rabbi Yossi who says mamon balim." Who says, who is the owner of this kachim kalim? That's a regular Jew is the owner of it because he gets to eat from the carbon. And so therefore, it's mamon balim and no me'ilah. But we're going to say the laws of nezek apply. Tanya Mala Mal Bashem, Rabbos Kachim Kalam Shem and Mono. So it says by somebody who steals or misappropriates a deposit, it's called that he's trespassing against God. This comes to include kachim kalam, which are his own money. That's the position of Rabbi Yossi Aglili. The Gemara says in this context, the Gemara challenges Rabbi Yochanan. Do you really want to say that even though Rabbi Yossi Aglili says that kachim kalam are considered like his money, but however, in this case, a mekadesh bechalko ben kachim kachim ben kachim kalam and a mekudeshes. But there's a Mishnah, an anonymous Mishnah in Kedushin that says, let's say you try to betroth a woman with his portion of the kachim kalam, you're not able to betroth her. So we see from here that it is not your own money. So the Gemara says, Lema delok Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Let's just say this must not be like Rabbi Yossi Aglili because you can't betroth her with your kachim kalam. So it must be that this Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Gemara says, no, I feel it Rabbi Yossi Aglili. You could even say it's like Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Kiyama Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Mechayim. When does Rabbi Yossi Aglili say it's your money? If you're still alive. If he's still alive, then the kachim, if the animal's still alive, then the kachim kalam is your money. But if you try to betroth the woman with the kachim kalam after a slaughter, I feel Rabbi Yossi Aglili modeh, even Rabbi Yossi Aglili would admit that when you acquire it, you're acquiring it from the shulchan gavola, from the temple property. As Gemara says in Mechayim, while it's still alive, does he really say? Does Rabbi Yossi Aglili really say? Do we really say that Rabbi Yossi Aglili says that kachim kalma your money while it's still alive? But tanan bechor mochron so tam chai that you could sell a firstborn animal while it's still alive, ubal mum chai, and also if it has a blemish while it's still alive, that you could sell it while it's alive to other kohanim, and with the blemish you could sell it also while it's alive, ubal mum chai, and while it's alive you could sell it to other kohanim, or or even if it's slaughtered, and you can betroth the woman. Yeah, why when it's alive are you allowed to do it? Only nowadays. The keeping the chazila akrava is little kohanim zechiyah b'gaveh. Since they can't be slaughtered, that's why the kohanim could have a portion. As much based on mikdash kaim, the chazila akrava when the temple was standing there, they could bring it as a carbon. You weren't able to sell it. So therefore, how can Rabbi Yossi Aglili says it? The Esvei, and about that piece, Ve'esvei Rabba or Nachem Olam Ba Shemo Rabba is Kachim Kalach Shem Mono to Rabbi Yossi Aglili. And we tried to say, but what about the fact Rabbi Yossi Aglili says it's your money? Meshani Ravina the Bechor B'chutz La'aretz. So there we're talking about a firstborn animal outside of Eretz Yisrael. V'aliba to Rabbi Shimon who says in Bo Tamimim Yakrivenu. In Bo in Lechatchil Lo, meaning to say that if they came from Chutz La'aretz, you can do it, but Lechatchil you can't do it. So we see from here that lechatchila you have to leave this firstborn animal in Chutz La'aretz to not bring it. There, Rabbi Yossi says that it's the money of the owners, but a regular firstborn animal or a kachim kalam in time of the base of mikdash, we're going to say it's not like the money of the baalim, and therefore you can't betroth a woman with it. Vim isa dekiyah, I'm a Rabbi Yossi Aglili memono mechayim. And for Rabbi Yossi Aglili, it says it's still alive, it's his money. Listen. So if that's the case, Lishnaha, Rabbi Yossi Aglili, HaRabbanan. You should have said that one is Rabbi Yossi Aglili, one is the Rabbanan. So the Gemara says, Matanas Kahunas Kamers. Oh, you're talking about the Matanas of the Kahuna? Shani Matanas Kahuna Kikazachu Mishulchan Gavoa Kazachu. The Gemara says, no. You're asking a question on Bechor, which is one of the Matanas Kahuna? No, it's different than Kachim Kam. The case of Matanas Kahuna is different. It gives to the Kohanim because there, when the Kohanim benefit from that, it's from the table of Hashem. And so therefore, also while it's still alive, it's considered to be like the Mammon Gavoa, and you can't be Mekadesh with it. I'm Yisrael Chai. Today's beautiful daf. Yeshakoach.